Hello, 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 everybody. We are live for the biggest, best New Zealand chat ever. And I've got my friend Richard here. Richard, how you doing?
Hey, Sam. How's it going? Thanks for inviting us along.
It's an absolute pleasure. This is a real test of the technology because we are literally on the other side of the world from each other. And, it's kind of crazy that we can do these things these days. But it's very nice to have you live from the South Island of New Zealand. And maybe you can just explain for the viewers, where exactly are you as of right now?
So I actually live in Wanaka. So that famous Wanaka tree, which we might talk about a little bit later on, is about 5 minutes walk from my house. So you could say I've got one of the world's most photographed locations, 5 minutes walk from my house. I haven't actually taken a picture of it for about 5 years myself, and I don't think I need to take another picture of it. But
but yeah, don't be showing off, Richard, because there's a place about 15 minutes from my house called Durdle Door, which is extremely well photographed as well. So this is what happens, right? Wherever we are on the other opposite sides of the world, certain things, and actually that's a really good point. We'll come to that later. Certain things and views and vistas and places are just iconic, aren't they? And that tree in Wanaka definitely is, but we'll talk about that. So time for you is morning time, 9ish. Are we there?
Yeah, like it's 9 o'clock in the morning here at the moment. So yeah, and we've just sort of come into, well, we're officially in spring here at the moment in New Zealand, but you wouldn't think it. We've had so much snow over the last couple of weeks. I was on the road in Mount Cook just a few days ago, and we nearly didn't get out because we had over half a meter of snow down at Mount Cook village. So yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, no such issues in the UK just yet, but you never know. So what I normally do, Richard, just for the first moment, I just say welcome to all the people out there who are watching, because we get a lot of regular fans, which is fab. And as ever, everybody out there watching, Richard has just wowed you with where he is. We kind of have a little game of who's come from the most exceptional place. I'm afraid Richard's probably going to win that today. Although Lynn is making a bit of a dash for you there, Richard. She's in Wellington. Not a bad gig either. So welcome along, Lynn. And
I know Lynn. So hi, Lynn.
Oh, there you go. There you go. And Jez is here about 2 miles up the road from me. So there you go. We've got all parties represented. Barbara's with us. She's been on a light and land trip to New Zealand a few years ago, Barbara. So fantastic. Thank you for coming and enjoying that. It must be time for another one, Barbara, surely. Ken is with us on the Isle of Sheppey. There's quite a good number of people with us here. Mike's in Charente. Is that Mike? Forgive me. I do not know where that is. Apologies. Bideford, North Devon, for Biddy. Tony's in Warwickshire. Oh, Yasmin, pretty cool place. NYC. I presume Yasmin, that's New York City. I can't think of another NYC it could be. Help me out, Richard. No, we don't know any. No, fair enough. I was hoping there might be somewhere in Britain I could link, but I can't think that quickly and talk about photography. So let's just talk about photography instead. We are obviously here to talk about New Zealand, and specifically Richard is with us because he runs Land Tour out to New Zealand, and that is next due in 2025, 21st of August, 1st of September 2025. And we're going to be talking about that tour, all about the South Island of New Zealand, about Richard's photographs, about some of the locations on that tour, some of which are very special and require specialist access and specialist local knowledge, which is why Richard's our man on the spot. And we're also going to talk generally about photography and his love for photography, and maybe how it's changed in the last few years as well, and how he's developing himself and how he can help develop you too. But as usual, if you have any questions at all about either the locations, about Richard, about his mountain bike behind him, about whatever it might be, do let us know. Drop a comment in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. That's nice and easy to do, and or if you're watching on Facebook. And I'll try and pick up those comments as we go, and I'll address those to Richard as we get to them. For now, thanks, Mike. Sorry, the Charente is in France. I've got an Italian wife. I'm not even allowed to know about France or learn anything about it. Forgive me for that one. Okay. But before we get too much further on, I just wanted to say, because Richard here has very recently won not just one prize, but two in the very prestigious Photographer of the Year. This is New Zealand Geographic Photographer of the Year. And Richard actually won the landscape and the wildlife sections of that, which does rather seem like showing off, Richard, if you mind me saying.
Yeah. It was quite an honour to win both of them in the same year, but it was a bit embarrassing on the awards night because they announced them as the first two awards, and I went up and collected them both, and it was a bit of a case of the winner is Richard Young again.
but just stay on stage, Richard, it's fine.
Yeah. But the awards trophies are actually there behind me at the moment, but
nice.
But like, it was really nice to get recognised and to get recognised across two different styles of photography in the same year. So,
yeah, no, definitely. And actually, I kind of twisted his arm a little bit on this because I said, okay, well, I want to talk about the award. I also want to show those images, although they're not strictly within the remit of what we're doing tonight. I thought it was really interesting because for me, there are two really fab images. I particularly love this one, which obviously won the landscape award. I think that kind of gets without saying, but because I think there's something quite kind of beguiling about it. It pulls you in a little bit more. It's less obvious. You know what I mean by that. There's a certain cool and warm thing going on. So this was fairly locally though, wasn't it, Richard, to you?
Yeah, so this is probably just sort of 10 minutes drive down the road from my house here in Wanaka, and it's on the side of the Clutha River. And in autumn, we get amazing mist down on the Clutha River in the morning. So it's just a misty morning in autumn. And I kind of wanted to get this idea that the leaves were falling from the trees. These leaves are actually out of focus on a tree in the foreground, and then with the trunks of some other trees in the background there. But it was really nice to have this recognised in the competition, because I think it is one of those sort of more intimate landscape shots. And quite often it's hard for these to be seen above sort of those big, grand, epic vistas in sort of landscape photography competitions, just because they've got such a wow factor to them. So like, it's really nice to see that some competitions are starting to recognise not just those big grand vistas as landscapes, but sort of a more intimate approach like this.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to touch on a bit of that as we go through the course of this evening as well. Richard's got a really beautiful portfolio of images from the South Island of New Zealand across different locations and in slightly different vibes, but all of them feel like him, which I think is really important as well. The wildlife image, we should just put it up because this was a really fun image too. Point of view here, I think, really interesting, and obviously graphically it's super strong as well. So just give us the quick background on this.
So it was actually down in the Ross Sea, which is the New Zealand area of Antarctica, and I was down there on an expedition ship, and I was photographing from the front bow of the ship looking directly down onto the ice, and we'd had these orcas spy hopping with the emperor penguins up on the ice and almost stopping and going in the water, and then some finally went in and popped out the water a little while later. So I don't know if they got scared off or if they were just playing, but I managed to catch this shot just as they jumped out the water. But I think the thing I like about it is it's almost an interesting shot even without the penguins in it. It's sort of almost composing up a landscape photograph and then adding the wildlife into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, fantastic images, and well done for the win. And for anyone who doesn't know, that competition is like the big competition down there. So I mean, that's the one to win if you're in the photographic world in that part of the South Seas, shall we say. But let's dive into New Zealand. And what I should kind of point out, Richard, is you are a British lad, aren't you? But you've been out there a fair number of years. So maybe we should just hit on that up at the top. Maybe just give us a tiny bit of how you ended up to be where you are.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Sussex, but I first came out to New Zealand in 2004 because my dad emigrated out here. So came out here to visit him, and then thought, oh, this is pretty good out here, you know. Like, I just started really getting seriously into my photography during that point, and I thought, well, I kind of like the landscapes out here. So I went back to the UK for a little while and then came back out, but I've been out here mainly since then. and used to live in Wellington and then moved down to Wanaka a few years ago to be a bit closer to all the big grand landscapes we've got down here in the South Island.
And there are some big grand landscapes. So we should just point out, though, Richard, this tour, obviously I mentioned it's in end of August in 2025. So that does put it in the winter in New Zealand. And the tour is based solely around the South Island, correct? And there's kind of logistically good reasons for that as well. But do you want to just maybe touch on why you chose to do it at that time of year? And obviously some of the benefits of that will become apparent as we go through.
Yeah, so like I think for me, the 2 times a year I really like to photograph in New Zealand are winter and autumn. I think they both offer exceptional conditions, both in terms of weather and also subject matter. But and also in winter, surprisingly enough, we get some very stable weather through in winter. So between all the snow and the ice and everything, we get some very blue sky days like this. And we actually get about the least amount of rain in August, which is when we're starting this tour. In a number of places like Milford Sound and Mount Cook actually get the least rain in August. And it's the colder months, but with that brings some beautiful conditions. We've got snow all over the Southern Alps, and we quite often get snow down to ground level in some of the mountain towns as well. So, and gorgeous frosty mornings. So it's a great time to be here in New Zealand. And yeah, so that's why we decided to run it at this time of the year. Like I've just been running a New Zealand tour recently in October, and we do get some good conditions occasionally in October, but we also get a lot of rain. So sort of August is a lot drier time to come to New Zealand, really.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so these first 2 or 3 slides, let the viewers know where we are here, because obviously we're kind of in beautiful mountains, beautiful lakes, very kind of traditional, great New Zealand vistas, as it were. So put us all as to where we are actually location-wise there.
Yeah, so this is actually the Ashburton Lake area of the Canterbury High Country, and this is where we're going to start the tour. And it's an area that's not visited as much by photographers, definitely from overseas, but it's an area I've been spending a lot of time over recent years, and I really do love it. And so we're going to spend the first couple of nights of the tour here, and we've got these beautiful lakes within the mountain landscape. So we're looking straight up onto the Southern Alps here, and we're really close to the Alps as well. So but we're actually going to stay here on a high country station. So there's a lodge on a high country station that we're going to stay at, which gives us access to all these amazing landscapes right on our doorstep, but quite a unique experience staying there on the station as well. Yeah,
it's I think the main thing you get from these first couple of images is just such a sense of or a taste of the sense of scale, just this huge, this big vista, isn't it? We talk about big skies, we talk about the lack of people maybe down there. I think for a lot of Brits that go over there, who I've spoken to, other photographers, obviously you can only scratch the tiny surface of it if you're just visiting for a few weeks or whatever it might be. But the one thing everybody says is this kind of getting back in touch with big nature. Is that kind of especially true in this area?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think this area, it is big sky country. We've got big, impressive landscapes. We've got that mountain backdrop. Like, these are just some of the smaller hills and close to where we're staying. But behind it, we've got the big Southern Alps. But you do get these big, impressive skies, and it's a great place to photograph those skies, because we've got all these bodies of water which serve as great sort of mirror-like reflections in the mornings as well.
You mentioned about the stability of the weather, and I suppose that when let's just talk specifically about the reflection side of things, because obviously this and the image before, there's some really beautiful reflections there. When you get those still mornings and this water presenting itself in front of you, that kind of symbiosis can be a really nice thing to play with, kind of, photographically. So is there anything you're particularly looking for from a technical point of view, or from a composition point of view, or certain things in the sky, or certain things, you know what I'm saying, anything from a tips point of view that you might be helping people with on this?
Yeah, well, the other picture is a bit of a blue sky day picture, but this is a more interesting shot, I think, because we've got those clouds which add a lot more interest and depth into the image, really drawing us in. But I tend to use a lot of symmetry with reflection shots, and it's one time that I'll tend to put the horizon right in the middle of the photograph, which if you ever go to a camera club or something, they'll say rule of thirds, you should have it on the third line and all of this. But there are times that I think it can be really bold to put the horizon straight in the middle of the photograph, and reflections are one time that it's really good to do that. And also with reflections like this, you're tending to get down really low to get that perfect mirror on the reflection, so getting your camera literally just above the water. And normally these mornings are so still that you don't even need ND filters on to smooth out the reflections or whatever, but sometimes these reflections can only last for a small period of time, and then you get a little bit of wind up just as the sun actually starts to get up. Like you get a bit of a morning wind that drives off the mountains and they disappear. So you have to be there at the right time for them, for sure. And mornings are normally best because it tends in the sort of towards sunset, you tend to get a bit more of a breeze generally.
Yeah. Well, I'm there. You've already got me there, Richard. I'm stood there. I'm feeling it. I'm loving it. I'm breathing the clean air. It just screams clean air, doesn't it? So let's just keep rolling. And like I say, if there's any questions anyone has, because I'll tell you what, we have actually got a technical question for you, which is a bit of a quiz question that Richard's going to drop in later on with one of the images. We're going to have a bit of a quiz for you viewers out there. So stay tuned, ready for that one. But I wanted to go on to this next image because there's a couple coming up which are maybe showing a kind of, or the flip of the coin, as it were, less of the big vista and more of the intimate landscapes, which is kind of how these kind of images tend to get called now. I mean, it's all just photography, but you know what I'm saying, Richard. Would you say that your approach may have changed slightly over the years to look for these types of images more, or did you always see and seek out these images, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I always had a love for trees and stuff like that, so I definitely photographed trees. But over recent years, my main focus does seem to be this more intimate approach to landscape photography. And there's actually a bit of a story behind this photograph, which is why I sort of put it in there. And it's taken the same location as the last two photographs. And I was out there on my own. It was probably, I think, 2020, and I was out there on my own, and I just set up for sunset on the side of one of the lakes and had this perfect mirror reflection. The sun was just slipping down over the horizon, and I just didn't feel inspired by the shot. I had this gorgeous sort of vista lined up, but I just didn't really feel I was achieving anything with taking the photograph. And just before the sun set, I just packed up my camera and walked off the location. And I felt a bit disheartened. And then, but on the way in, I'd noticed these two silver birch trees. And I thought, oh, well, the light was already half fading, but I just thought, I'll just go over and have a look at them, and maybe I'll come and photograph them tomorrow. And then just in the half light, I made this photograph. And I think if I hadn't have walked off that location that evening, I obviously wouldn't have got this image. But it did represent for me a bit of a change of sort of almost always chasing after those big vistas to actually now my goal is to create photographs like this, which are more personal to me and sort of a more unique approach to the landscape, I guess.
It's really, really beautiful. I mean, the streaming thing is always not the best platform for looking at high quality images, as it were, because it compresses things down and all the rest of it. But Richard sent me the larger file of this for the preparation, etc., and just the kind of the pastels, the color in it, the kind of soft, peachy, bit of purpley, there's a bit of blue, there's the silver birch. Obviously, it's so beautiful. It's such a really beautiful image. I don't want to go over the top, but it's really up my street as a fan of these types of things. But a question, Richard, and maybe we'll kind of, maybe I'll move to the next image just because this is actually another good point of it, though. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. But do you think some clients, maybe sometimes when they're out with you, and obviously this is a big trip, and we obviously from people coming from the side from the UK to New Zealand, it could genuinely be called a once in a lifetime kind of a trip, and that's not hyperbole. It may well be for a lot of people. Do you ever sense sometimes people feel like they should be doing those big vista images when they're out on trips with you? If they've gone a long way, they've come for the beautiful New Zealand mountains, you know, do you ever get that sense that some people feel a bit like they should be pointing at the big thing rather than maybe some of these more intimate things?
Oh yeah, for sure, because sometimes someone sees an image like this and says it could be taken anywhere in the world, which is kind of true, really, isn't it? It's and it doesn't necessarily say to you New Zealand. In fact, they're actually introduced trees, because silver birch trees aren't native to New Zealand even. So but like, I think the thing is, with that, it's deciding what you want to come away with from a trip. Because if you want to come away with a set of your own interpretations of a load of classic New Zealand landscapes, there's nothing wrong with that. But there is going to be little sometimes to set those photographs apart from photographs of other people that have been to those same locations. And like in the UK, you mentioned Durdle Door earlier on, and I visited Durdle Door when I was back in the UK a few years ago, and I went and photographed it. And it is a stunning landscape, and you want to photograph it because it is. But I think it's coming away with a mixture of both some of those classic landscapes, but also something that's a little bit more unique and personal to you as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing is maybe mindset. You know, maybe sometimes these sorts of images are a little easier to find and to go looking for when you're in a calm place. They are for me when I feel content, and maybe being halfway around the world actually allows you that calm to just concentrate on photography. You start to see more and more things in the landscape. You're more aware of things in the landscape, I think, generally. So I just thought it was a slightly query thing for me, because I know sometimes people can feel like that's the image they had in their mind when they went there. I mean, on the big trip, but I mean, in one location, we can go, can't we, sometimes with preconceptions of what we want, and other times we have to just deal with the conditions we find, the light we find, you know, whatever it is. And then sometimes it's good to pivot and look at things in a slightly different way. But carrying on this theme of kind of quite personal or intimate landscapes, this is a really cool image because it plays with a lot of things to do with scale that I really enjoy, but also light. The graphical design's really super, you know, strong on it as well. So are we still in, whereabouts are we? We're still in the area. I mean, it doesn't really matter, obviously.
Yeah. So literally, so literally that photograph and the last two were all shot with probably within 100 meters of each other. So this is 4 years later. This was just this year. But this is a location I go back to multiple times a year, and I never shoot the same thing. Like that last picture of the silver birch in the snow. I found those, and I had this gorgeous snow, and I could see it all over the trees, but I didn't want to go back to the same tree that I photographed a few years before, because I didn't see any point of recreating a different version of the same image. So I went and worked with a different subject, and likewise with this year, I went and worked with a different subject again. So I think every time I go to a landscape like this, I'm just exploring. I'm trying to find something new and sort of a new interpretation of the landscape. But this was just a gorgeous morning. We had evening. It was at sunset, but we had this amazing ice cracked up on the side of the lake where the lake had been freezing and defrosting, and it pushed it all up on the side of the lake. And there was this one little arrangement which I really liked, and I could see by the setting sun that it was just going to catch it just as it slipped down over the hills. So I just sat up there and waited for this illumination to come up behind the ice, which sure enough happened. And it's got that real sort of warm, cool feeling to it, sort of that real contrast, which adds a lot of depth. And obviously the warmth comes towards us and the blue recedes. So like, it does change the way we view the image with that warm, cool contrast to it as well. But like, as you say, some really interesting and unusual shapes that you don't often find in nature as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. It looks kind of like it could be a structure, you know, a sculpture is what is the word I'm probably for. One question's come in from Ken about the gear you might be using. I think that Ken was probably potentially referring to the image before. I'm not sure. Sorry about that potentially being a 4:3 crop, or is shooting medium format? Are you're not, you're digital, aren't you? Fully digital these days?
Yeah, I'm fully digital these days. So I used to shoot on a Mamiya 7. And which is basically it's actually a 4:5, closer to a 4:5 ratio than a 6:7 really, which is a medium format film. And when I moved digital, I kind of kept that same aspect ratio. So I primarily shoot all of my personal work in a 4:5 aspect ratio, and I do crop them all afterwards. But permanently on my camera, I have a 4:5 grid line up on the view, and I use it to compose that way when I'm out in the field. And I've just found that I've got used to seeing the landscape in that way and framing in that 4:5 frame, and it's become like, I guess, a part of my style. And I very seldom use this sort of general 3:2 aspect ratio that you get within the cameras. So I do shoot on a Nikon Z8, so I do crop all the images, but
so, you're composing the field, the 5x4 on, and actually Nikon's one of the few that actually sensibly give you some of those crop aspects in the viewfinder on the live view. That's the bug of mine. We won't get into that now. But thank you for the question, Ken. And if anyone else has any stuff as we go along, either technical like that, or about the locations, or even just comments about the photographs and or about New Zealand, do let us know. I did say to Richard, you got any nice like behind the scenes stuff you could just throw me one in? And this is quite a neat one, because it, sometimes we see the beautiful images, but when you actually do see, okay, well, this is how I would be traveling, this is where I would be, that's quite a nice thing to see. But also, Richard, we alluded to this up the top, going in winter, I know you mentioned the weather can be reasonably stable, but there are certain times where you require certain types of vehicular access and quite a lot of pre-planning, obviously based on your experience there. So are there any bits you just want to touch on that now from the point of view of the tour that we have?
Yeah, well, travel in winter, and especially like in the mountainous areas, can become really demanding. And we get quite a lot of snow right the way down to the side of the lakes in like the last area that we were just looking at, which is from the same general area. And you do need four-wheel drive access to get to a lot of these locations in winter, so in the mountain areas. But even on some of the high passes on the big main roads in New Zealand will often get closed, or sometimes they'll only be accessible with four-wheel drive vehicles and chains. So I've actually brought two of these vans. So these are VW T6 vans that we've got set up for running these tours, like these winter tours, and they're four-wheel drive vans, and we've had them quite specially modified to give us the best access we can. So we've had them raised and underbody protection put on them, good off-road tires, we carry snow chains. So it really enables us to get to some locations that you just couldn't get to otherwise in normal tour vehicles, but still actually have enough space to carry everybody and the luggage, because with photographers, luggage is always a problem as well. But so we've actually got two of these, and this is what we'll be using for the winter tour. So I'll be driving one of them, and then one of the other photographers that I work with will be driving another one, and that will just enable us to get to some really unique landscapes if we do get some of these gorgeous winter conditions. So
yeah, cool. I mean, look, it's fantastic. You talked a little bit there about the conditions though at the lakes, and obviously whenever you're near any bodies of water, that can give you fantastically atmospheric conditions, I suppose. So have we moved a little bit now in location? Should we just let people know where we're up to?
Yeah. So we're moving now into the McKenzie country area, and we're going to spend a couple nights in this area and staying in Twizel, which is going to enable us to access many locations from the one base there in Twizel and right into Mount Cook National Park, which we'll see in a minute, but also just some of the surrounding area. And we've got all these big alpine lakes there, and some of them get some amazing mist on them in the morning. And I love mist. I think it just gives me so much more to work with in the landscape, and it's something we only really tend to get more regularly sort of through autumn and winter. Like you don't tend to get that much in the summer months, just when we've got those cold temperatures and we get all this mist coming off the lakes. And I think it's one thing that enables you to be sort of a bit more expressive in your work and create some more original images, because no morning is going to be the same. So that's one reason I like staying in this area, just because we've got some great access to some lovely misty landscapes, hopefully.
Yeah, and I mean, Richard has alluded to the fact that obviously there's multiple parts of this tour in terms of the location areas, and I mean, you know, that's based on his many years of experience doing it, and it's very easy to misunderstand maybe the size even of South Island. Big, isn't it, Richie? You know, there's a huge amount of places that you could cover in this. So yeah. What is it that you, I mean, obviously great locations, but kind of whenever you drive around South Island, it all looks great. So I mean, what is it that you really focused on to in this particular tour? You know, is it a mix of locations? Is it literally the best places you can find? Is it a kind of a mix of everything from that point of view?
Yeah, so like I've really picked some of the locations that are best in winter and are suited to shooting these winter landscapes. So some of these locations I wouldn't spend as much time in the middle of the summer, for example. Like I'd normally spend a lot more time out on the coast in the middle of the summer. But at the same time, I have tried to include a real mixture of location and some real sort of New Zealand highlights. So if you are coming to New Zealand for the first time, you are going to see some of those really well-known locations, like, say, Milford Sound, but really try to put an emphasis on what the locations that are good for winter photography.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, and that's why I wanted to bring it up in a way that it is a specifically winter designed tour, as in it's not just is the best bits of New Zealand. It's this is a South Island winter tour with that very much in mind. And you know, talking of which, the next couple of images, we're into a very famous kind of area, famous part of South Island in particular. And this is all, it's national. I mean, it's all part of a very large national park. Is that right, Richard?
Yeah. So so that's Aoraki Mount Cook, so known as Aoraki, the cloud piercer. And as you can see in this picture of Mount Cook, it's basically piercing the clouds, which it quite often does. So Mount Cook is 3,724 meters high, but it's a pretty impressive mountain because it gains most of that height straight from the lake. So you've got this big sheer mountain in front of you. And so it's within Mount Cook National Park, but that's part of the UNESCO World Heritage Area, which make up Mount Cook National Park, Westland National Park, Mount Aspiring National Park, and Fiordland National Park. And we'll actually be going through every one of those parks on this trip as well. So we'll be pretty much for almost the rest of the trip after this, we'll be traveling through that World Heritage Area, which is quite a special area in the sort of southwest corner of New Zealand. And we've got all these mighty big mountains and a lot of sort of untouched wilderness around them. So it's a beautiful landscape. Mount Cook's obviously a huge draw for photographers, this big impressive peak. And we won't be staying right in there at Mount Cook itself, because sometimes in winter it can get a bit clagged in there sometimes. So being a little bit further off enables us to travel in to Mount Cook, hopefully when we get a nice weather window, and do some photography around the mountains and the lakes and rivers there as well. Yeah, and it is, as we've alluded to, it's really part of, even especially around that particular area. And one thing I wanted to say actually, Richard, was I've been down once to South Island of New Zealand, and it was in the December time
the year. It's a slightly odd time to go, but that's just how it worked out. But I remember and I've alluded to it tonight, there's hardly anyone anywhere. Now, I'm sure in some of the more popular places there are more crowds and maybe more local photographers or photographers generally, but it's not my impression, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think especially in winter, there are parts of, say, the North American areas, the big national parks, which are literally just like crawling with photographers in certain zones, and loads of places where there aren't, don't get me wrong. Yeah, there are certain hot spots where it's just crawling. Do you have many other people that you see out and about when you're in some of these locations?
Yeah, it really largely depends on the time of the year. So like the biggest sort of tourism season to come and visit New Zealand is sort of December through to February, because people come over here because it's our summer and they want summer. But if you're going to ask me, it's the worst time of the year to come here, especially as a photographer. Stuff's can get very overcrowded in some of the popular locations, and you've got a lot of sort of cell phone selfie taker type people, which will get in the way of your photographs, because some of these landscapes have become so iconic and everybody wants to go there and see them for themselves. But the other problem during the summer months for a photographer is our daylight hours. Like we get like sort of 14 hours of daylight, which becomes very hard to work, shooting sunrises and sunsets, and you either don't get very much sleep or you end up missing out on some shoots. But that's one great thing about being here in winter. Those sunsets are nice and early and the sunrises are nice and late, so we can really maximize getting out there shooting for all the sunrises and sunsets without getting too burnt out, which is great. And because I kind of think for a lot of landscape photography, sort of being there in the middle of summer on a blue sky day sometimes can be very challenging conditions to work with, both for the big vista and also for even more sort of abstract and intimate shots. So that's one reason I really like winter. But yeah, it's a lot less overcrowded, and I'll touch on that a little bit more when we get to a picture of the Wanaka tree in a bit.
Yeah, and there's it's beautiful light, isn't it, in winter? It's a certain type of light, it's a certain quality of light, like we can see here, in fact. So is this the sort of glacial lake at the foot of that mount, the Mount Cook, just before it ascends? Is that, am I right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So just around sort of Mount Cook there, we've got a couple of big glacier lakes that are fairly easy to walk to. This one's sort of 15-20 minutes walk from the car park, and we get amazing icebergs in these lakes. Unfortunately, the icebergs are why the lake's there, because the glacier is melting and all these icebergs are carving off the glacier and it's getting smaller every year. But for a photographer, they do offer a really unique subject to photograph, and getting these in the foreground with the big mountains in the back is it's a great landscape to work in.
It's super beautiful. I mean, it's not quite East Sussex, but nothing wrong with East Sussex. But you know, we were joking about it. It's not quite Dorset either. Before anyone chimes in, no. And you mentioned, just before I get to this next image, actually, because it's a slightly different kind of vibe. You mentioned about the walk from the car there, Richard. People may worry about how fit do they need to be, how much walking is there. I'm sure, obviously, you bear that in mind. We want it to be as open to everyone as possible, you know, within obviously practical limits. So can you give us any bit more of a steer on that from a access or feasibility point of view into fitness levels?
Yeah, and I suppose one thing, like being in winter and having the four-wheel drive vans, it enables us to drive right to a lot of locations, and there's so many locations that we're going to photograph that don't require any walking at all unless you want to go off and walk further and explore. But this is one of probably the longer walks we would do. So this is about 20 minutes to get there. There's one other walk we'll put in as an option that might be sort of probably 35-40 minutes one way to get there. But the great thing is, having the two vehicles and a couple guides, we can sort of split up the group a little bit if necessary and work with that. So it does give us a lot of flexibility around that. sort of the walking in New Zealand in winter, like obviously you've got to bear in mind sometimes there might be some snow and ice. That is a factor of traveling in winter, and that's, well, hopefully there will be some snow and ice, because that's kind of what we're going for. But yes, so it's a real mixture. There's a lot of locations we can walk to, but then we can be very that don't require any walking, but then we can be very flexible for the ones that do require some walking, if it's some of the group that don't want to do some short walks as well. So
yeah, nice flexibility there as well. And obviously, like I said, we're going to just slightly change tack a tiny bit in terms of time of day. There is the opportunity, I presume, with beautiful clear skies, you must have some of these dark sky areas, right?
Yeah, so Mount Cook is part of the Araki McKenzie Dark Sky Reserve. So it's an international dark sky reserve, and it's got some amazing clear skies, but so has so many places in New Zealand, and so many of the places that will be staying, you can probably shoot some astrophotography almost from the hotels, because we've got these gorgeous dark skies and we really are in the middle of nowhere in some of these places. So there will be opportunities for astrophotography during the tour, and we will make a couple of 1 or 2 nights. We'll say, right, tonight's looking good, we'll try and do a little bit of astrophotography or something. But for anybody that's really into it, there will be some other options from almost just outside the hotels. And also, being here in winter, it's the best time of the year for that. So the galactic center of the Milky Way is a lot higher in the sky. Sort of during the summer months, it's very low, or you don't get to see the whole Milky Way. So it really is the best time to see our night sky as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. And like Richard said, you can probably even just lie in bed, stick your lens out the window. It's just like that. It's easy as that.
Yeah.
It's quite conditions.
Maybe not quite lay in bed, but
right. Okay. It's quite good. He won't lay in bed with you. I'll just make that really clear. It's quite condition dependent of it, I suppose, isn't it? So it's one of those cool things that you guys know. If you've got your eye on the weather, if it's looking good, it's like, hey guys, why don't we have a little look at this tonight? Because tonight's kind of a good time to have a look at it. So that's really cool. Now, for everyone at home, I hope you've been watching along, because we've got a little bit of a teaser. I don't want to say too much about this, but Richard, you mentioned you might have a little bit of a question for the viewers and for me, in fact, with this one. So you may as well hit me with it.
Yeah, right, cool. Well, I was going to ask you if you could guess what lens or techniques or anything I used to create this photograph. Probably most importantly, what lens and how that affects the way I've composed the image and balanced out basically the foreground and the background within this one frame. So.
Okay, so we're talking focal length. Is that what we want to ask people?
Yeah, well, let's go for
if they're going to have a guess at something.
Yeah. Focal lengths plus any other techniques that might have been used potentially.
Oh, okay. So, all right, if you're watching live, just let us know any thoughts on the focal length and or any other techniques. Obviously, for those watching on the catch-up, less of a game, but you're going to have to wait 20 seconds to find out. So there's still some element of jeopardy. I'm filling time a little bit whilst I let any comments come in. Mark's had a bit of stab, so let's just show what he's saying. He's saying 35 mil. Steve, don't give anything away, Richard. Steve's saying 70 to 200 with focus stacking. Okay, sensible. I'll give it another few seconds before I close that down.
Sure, we can get a couple more responses. Yeah.
Go on out there if you're watching.
Go on, have a guess.
I think, if you're on YouTube, it's one of those things you've got to be logged in, haven't you, to make a comment. So I sometimes wonder if that's.
Oh, do you? Yeah.
You can't just come with that. So John's coming. You're hedging your bets there a bit, John. 2470 with focus stacking. You've left a fair amount of length range. It's a
like it's not really a defined focal length, is it?
No, you did say lens, Richard. So we shouldn't beat up on John too much. All right. No. Well, listen, I'm going to add mine. I'm going to add mine because my feeling is there's definitely something a bit longer going on to help with a little bit of this. But I see you as an all-in-one image type of a guy. So I'm actually going to be wrong because I think it's longer than this. But I'll say 50 just for the sake of it.
All right. Well,
go on.
You sort of nailed the focal lengths It's almost spot on. So
that is
well done there, Sam.
I will really point that out. He said he wasn't going to tell me, so okay, good.
So first of all, how did you work that out, that it was probably a 50mm focal length?
It felt to me like there was some compression going on.
Yeah.
So when I say that, I mean between up to the foreground and that mountain in the background. That should be quite a bit smaller if we were shooting quite wide. But didn't feel like there was too much of that. Therefore, maybe not 70 up to 200. Plus, I think I just kind of know what 50 looks like, because that's kind of what I walk around with all the time. But that would have been a very easy way to get that wrong, wouldn't it? You're saying there might be something else as well going on?
Yeah. So like it is shot on a 50mm focal length, but it's actually basically almost a stitched panorama as well. So it's 3 vertical frames that have been stitched together to make that 8:10 aspect ratio frame. And I've actually shot this with a 50mm tilt shift lens, and I've had a little bit of tilt applied, which has enabled me to get both the foreground and the distant mountains in the background. So I'm using the tilt for that, and then I've actually used the shift of the lens to shift left and shift right, and to make essentially that panorama, stitched together a panorama. But the important thing is, I guess that's quite a complex way of achieving this image, but the reason I've done that is I did want the mountains to have that presence within the frame. And I see a lot of people photograph big mountain landscapes and they're using like a 14mm lens, and the mountains are just lost, if you know what I mean. They're these tiny things on the horizon, and it enables them to work with these close foregrounds, but it becomes all about the foreground and all the presence is on that foreground. And even with a 24mm lens, we get that. But I feel when we get into sort of 35mm and sort of 50mm, like someone said 35mm, and a 35 is actually a really good lens, I find, to work in the mountains, because it enables still to work with quite a close foreground, but bring those mountains a bit closer. But the 50mm does that even more, so it's really giving that presence to the mountains. But then we do run into issues of depth of field, and a couple of people did suggest focus stacking there, which is one way you could achieve that. I don't kind of like merging images in terms of like, I know this is actually a panoramic image, but they're overlaid rather than sort of different merges, and I find it quite complex doing focus stacking. So I tend to use a lot of tilt shift lenses, and they enable you to create a photo like this basically in camera, and work with that closer foreground that normally with a 50mm lens we wouldn't be challenged to get both the mountains and the foreground in focus. We just wouldn't be able to achieve that. So the only option really is focus stacking or using a tilt shift lens.
Yeah, no, really good explanation as well. And I think actually for anyone watching at home as well, it'll be really difficult to see, but the foreground is that frost on the what's the word I'm searching for, Richard? The
tussock grass,
not leaves, tussock grass. Thank God. That's sharp, and the mountain sharp behind, but also, like you say, you've kept that sense of scale there, and that and the grandeur. So really, wait, just one geeky question, because I used the Zeds for a few years. That the tilt shift, are you using an old F tilt shift with the adapter on there, or have you?
So I've actually got the 24, the 45, and the 85. I've got all 3 of them, and I'm using them with the old FDZ adapter on the Z8.
Nice. That's a really neat. Great way to do it. Nice way around. Now we're going to keep rolling just for time purposes, because we've got about 10-15 minutes left. Everyone, thank you so much for watching, and well done everyone who had a plonk on a guess there, because it's always sticking your neck out, but we appreciate there's no wrong answers, apart from obviously everyone who got it wrong. No, I'm joking. It's an interesting thing to talk about, and we wanted to just obviously make that point. We have next few images, Richard. We've gone further south still, aren't we? In right down to that southwest kind of side into the Milford Haven area. So tell us about that.
So this is down in Milford Sound, right down in Fiordland National Park. So we're going to go and stay down here for 2 nights, and we're going to stay at the one and only lodge, the one and only hotel that's actually out of Milford Sound itself. It's a very expensive hotel to stay in, so we don't often get to stay there. But we thought it was a really unique thing to include in this tour, to be out there at Milford Sound for 2 whole nights, which enables us basically 4 opportunities for sunrise or sunset to go out and hopefully capture a photograph like this, looking out over Milford Sound. But it also gives us a bit more chance to just explore the whole area. About 98% of people that visit Milford Sound only go for the day, and they're only normally out of Milford Sound for about 4 hours, and that's it. Because there's only the one place you can stay out there. So actually having a couple of nights out here is a really unique experience, and we're right in sort of the middle of Fiordland National Park, and it's a very atmospheric and dramatic landscape. And I think maybe, Sam, if you skip to that next photograph. So this is actually of one of the boats going out on Milford Sound, and we'll do a boat trip during one of the days that we're there out on the fjord itself. And we've got these huge, vast mountains coming straight down into the fjord, and this is a landscape I kind of feel you want some rain in this landscape, because it's the rain that brings the whole landscape to life. And this is actually my favorite picture of Milford Sound that I've taken, not the last one. I think the other one's just quite a sort of standard view of Mitre Peak there, but I think this is a photograph that really captures that atmosphere of Fiordland, and hopefully spending a couple of nights down there in Fiordland, we're experiencing some of that atmosphere and sort of be there, sort of surrounded within that landscape, which will be great.
Yeah, I mean, you can see all that water just streaming down that right-hand side there. You know,
Yeah.
There just seems to be sort of water, rivulets and waterfalls, as it were, flying off the side of that. So yeah, that's one to get your sea legs on for everyone in that little boat there. But it is one of those places, like you say, that is so often kind of seen and visited, but like you say, maybe just touched on. So it'd be nice to dive in a bit more detail. And I know you just briefly touched on, and we're going to keep rolling just for time purposes, but you briefly touched on the fact that the accommodation there is really fantastic. And I think with a lot of this, because I go back to that point I mentioned earlier, it is a bit of a once in a lifetime trip for a lot of people. And so Richard kind of was also tasked with making it a once in a lifetime quality across the whole lot, as it were. It's not just the locations, but also in some of the places where we're staying as well. Just as we move on, Stuart's thrown up a question there about it rains a lot in this area, about 8 to 0 or so. I'm not necessarily expecting you to know the exact meterage, but
yeah, well, I'd say actually maybe even closer to 10 meters a year. So like it's not unusual to get sort of 200 mil of rain over a 24-hour period at all down there. So
wow,
yeah,
pack your ponchos. Yeah. But all that rain gives us all heads towards things like this, doesn't it?
Yeah. So there's some of the most beautiful sort of subtropical rainforest down there on the west coast, and the west coast does get its fair share of bad weather, but that's what creates this landscape, and it's what creates these beautiful forests with all this moss. And this is just on the way out there to Milford, at a forest I love to photograph. And like, again, it's a location you kind of don't want a bright sunny day in the middle of the summer. You want to be there in some overcast conditions to photograph in these forests. And when they're a bit wet as well, they just come alive, and you've got all these lovely green mosses in the landscape, which are absolutely stunning.
I suppose it's common things with woodland and forests is can be finding the order in the chaos, can't it? But there is this unifying moss vibe going on color wise, which is something to work with when you're down in that area. I want to just give us on a little bit, not only for the time, but because I really wanted to get into this image and the next couple that follow, because we've kind of alluded to it a little bit. But this again is actually a really beautiful, intimate landscape within potentially a well-known kind of zone.
Well, but this was actually shot. Sorry.
No, go on, tell me.
It was actually shot at an incredibly popular location, one that sort of during the summer thousands of people a day would probably almost visit, and a location that I'd almost stopped photographing. And this actually, one time I walked out there, I didn't take a camera with me, and I had to borrow a camera from someone to take this photograph, because I saw this and I was just like, wow, look at that. And so I think sometimes if we do have a bit more time to connect with the landscape and spend some time, we can see something grander than these big grand vistas and these little abstract, intimate parts of the landscape, and create something really interesting like this photograph.
Yeah, it's really, really fantastic. Beautifully dealt with, beautifully composed. But we touched on the fact that we're going to get to the tree. We call it. I'm not sure what the locals call it, but I mean, this is a really beautiful version of the Wanaka tree. But why do you think it's captured the imagination of landscape photographers so much?
Well, I think it's just that whole sort of contrast of this beautifully placed tree within the lake, and you don't often get trees in lakes within the landscape. The tree actually grew from an old fence post, and it's not the only tree in a lake in New Zealand either. There's quite a few more of these, and that have quite often grown from fence posts. But this one really has captured the attention of the wider world. And personally, like, I put this photograph in just because it is an iconic New Zealand location, and we'll be staying just 5 minutes walk from this, and just down the road from my house. Actually, we're not staying at my house. But sometimes I feel that it is a photograph. Do we need another photograph of the Wanaka tree? Is there anything more to say about this tree? And yes, we can go and test ourselves on that subject and try and create our own interpretation of it. But I'm not sure if there's really anything left to say to the world about this tree personally. So yeah, like, I think it is a lovely place to go to, but I think there's a lot more in a lot of the landscapes we're going to, and definitely here in Wanaka as well.
Talking of which.
So this is another very iconic view over on the west coast, looking up to the peaks of Mount Tasman on the left there, and Mount Cook on the right. This is a scene that's become incredibly iconic, but I think it holds its weight a lot better than the Wanaka tree for me. It's a beautiful place to be there on the right morning, when those huge big peaks reflect into the lake with all that rainforest surrounding it. It's quite an amazing location.
Now, you mentioned, Richard, and I'm going to just keep us rolling again, just for the time point, that you excuse me, I'm going the wrong way. Potentially in the winter, you tend to spend a little bit more time, and you've curated the tour, maybe a little bit more time in the mountainous regions and inland a little bit as well. But there are a couple of bits where you touch along the coast side of things as well, up on the west coast area. So, and the next couple of images, I believe, are from very similar times of day. So when might you best be suited out in that locale?
Yeah, so this image and the next photograph were only taken about 3 weeks ago. They're taken on the west coast, and they're taken where we're going to be staying on this tour, in a little place called Punakaiki, where we've got these amazing rock formations on the coast. But it's a really dramatic, interesting landscape, sort of all this limestone landscape that's been shaped by the weather and the erosion of the sea. And here, like another number of other places on this tour, we tried to pick a hotel that we're right there, and you can almost take photographs straight from the hotel. And that beach behind us in this image, we'll actually be staying on a hotel right there on the beach, so you can walk onto the beach from the hotel. And that's one thing we've tried to do with this tour, is we've paid a bit more and got into some of those best hotels right there, so we're immersed in the location. But yeah, so being out here on the west coast, and sunset is absolutely gorgeous, and that last light hitting the landscape. And these two photographs were taken 2 days apart, and there's only a minute between them in terms of timing, which is, considering the time difference of sunset each day, it must have been around about the same angle of light both days. But that gorgeous last light, just as it hits the landscape and as it slips over the horizon, can be really interesting to work with.
It's like fire, isn't it? Catching that light
Yeah.
on the back
Yeah.
wall there. It's really, really
Yeah.
beautiful, lovely shapes, etc. On all of these beach crystal locations, there's lots of cool abstract things to play with as well. We're just going to finish with the last couple of images, and this definitely isn't Dorset, and it definitely isn't Sussex area. Are you still in and around that West Coast, Punakaiki, kind of around that area here?
Yep. So this is just on the coastline near Punakaiki. We've got the forest there is very different to what we see in further south in New Zealand. So we've got these amazing nikau palms, and this is about the furthest south they grow. And it's kind of like the Lost World, this landscape. We've got these really interesting plants and these big sort of limestone cliffs above them, and when you look up this particular river valley, it's like looking into the Lost World from Jurassic Park. It's a really gorgeous and interesting sort of prehistoric type landscape.
Yeah, it's a different challenge for you if you've been used to UK woodland photography or forestry. It's a different challenge photographically, but an exciting one because it's completely different shapes and colors, etc., etc. Not only can you do Lord of the Rings, then you can do the Lost World, you can do Jurassic Park whilst you're over there on the South Island. And so some references for you. We did just want to put a little bit of wildlife. You snuck this one in on the end, Richard.
Yeah, so there's not really a wildlife focus on this trip, but we will hope to see some of these at one or two of the locations, and these are Kia, so it's the world's only alpine parrot, and they're very inquisitive and they'll come very close to you. They normally try and land on your car and rip all the rubber off your car and rip anything else they can get their beaks on. They also like drinking coffee in cafes. but there will be some opportunities for some wildlife during the tour. And I guess just one last thing to touch on, anybody coming here to New Zealand having a selection of lenses, something like a 24 to 120 and then maybe even a 100 to 400 can be a great sort of flexible option to photograph the landscapes here and allow for some opportunity wildlife photography as well. So
yeah, no, nice. And those 100 to 400, some of them have got quite a lot lighter these days as well, so much more portable than they used to be to have big lenses on. Well, Richard, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on board from all the way from the South Island of New Zealand. And for everyone out there who wants to know anything else about the tour, and we kind of tried to cover as much as we can tonight, but if you can find it on the lightandland.co.uk website. And if you have any questions after watching this, and or after having looked at the website, do contact the office, and they can hopefully answer that for you. And if they've got anything more locally, they have to bounce off Richard, they'll get hold of him and he'll answer those questions for you. But I just want to stress two things finally. One, Richard is a super nice guy and an extremely capable photographer. And if you're going to go to New Zealand, make sure you do it properly and go with someone like Richard. And two, as importantly, just get to New Zealand in your life and do it with Richard. But it really is a completely different world. And if you can make the trip, it is well worth doing. And if you're going to spend a lot of money, you want to make sure you're doing it in the best way and you get the absolute most from it. And his team on the ground will really make sure they can do that for you, so that you'll go back with some amazing photographs, but amazing experiences, amazing memories, and some friends that come in along with these trips as well. So Richard, thank you very much for your time. I've just got to do a tiny bit of plugging for our next session here on the live streams off. But Barbara is saying wonderful atmospheric landscapes and the excitement of winter, certainly in many of these photographs. Thank you for showing us your wonderful photographs. Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you for watching. And Jez on the bucket list. You know it, Jez. Get there, man. Get that lottery ticket bought. And Mike, big thanks to you both. Fabulous images. I mentioned I was going to do a little bit of promo. So here on the live stream, we are going to be back in a couple of weeks' time or 3 weeks' time, Monday the 18th of November, usual time, usual place, 8 p.m. And it's a bit of a gear special. We don't normally do gear related things. We're always talking about the pictures and the landscapes and the locations. But I've persuaded to do a bit of a geek out session. So it's going to be me, Tom Sullum, Astrid, and the king of gear, Damien de Mulder, who has worked for a lot of manufacturers, in fact, advising them on gear production and also on gear reviews. So between all four of us, we've got some fun things about the gear we use right now, why we choose to use that gear, some of our favorite previous gear, and some stuff we wish we'd never sold. I'm going to try and make that one quite a light-hearted one with some examples of images that we've taken on certain kit. And it's an unashamed geek out. Don't be afraid to do it sometimes. It's absolutely fine. But I will say, Richard, thanks so much again, mate. It's a great pleasure to have you on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us along, Sam. And it was great to share some New Zealand images with everyone. And yeah, I hope everybody really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. We're getting loads of nice comments coming in still whilst I'm chatting away. But we're going to let you go and have the rest of your day whilst we go off to bed, get out on the bike, and we'll see you on the live stream again in the future sometime. But from me and from Richard, to everyone at home, cheerio for now. We'll see you again sometime. Bye-bye.